I'm thinking that's not clear.
That's good looking.
Very kind.
You know, the mayor has to find a place occasionally. That's right. Get on the other side of the table.
Right. Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the General Committee meeting. Declare the meeting open and begin with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners on whose land we meet today, the Cubby Cubby or the Gubby Gubby people, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We have an apology today from Councillor Tom Wegener, who has a bereavement in the family. We have no presentations or deputations. Councillors, the General Committee meeting is more informal than the ordinary meeting. So when staff members come up to address each item, you can ask questions up front. We might have some light discussion, but we only move into formal debate when the discussion starts to suggest we're starting to argue points. We save that for the debate. You don't need to stand to speak, unlike the formal ordinary meeting. And what else? Yeah, and for the benefit of those at home, the motions that are passed today only have the status of recommendations to the ordinary meeting on Thursday, which is the forum where the motions are ratified as a decision of the local government. So we begin with some items referred to from the Services and Organisation Committee. That's the Audit and Risk Committee membership. Councillors felt that we needed to consider this further at the Services and Organisation Committee meeting last week. So councillors, questions for Deb, who's provided some comparative pricing.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, Joe.
Just with comparative pricing, with the number of meetings that we have a year with the Audit Risk Committee, what are the financial implications for council of increasing from one fee to the next?
Yes. So, Councillor Joe, if you based it on 4 meetings a year, you'd be looking at over the cost of a year $3,200, moving from what was originally recommended in the report to yes. So you'd be looking at that difference, comparing it to the current fee, which is $300 per member per meeting.
Was it?
Yeah. There are 2 external members, aren't there?
Yes, there are. Yeah, the chair and then 1 ordinary member.
Is any other councillors have questions for Deb about this?
No, thank you for the information you provided, Deb. And it was actually quite good to see how other councils are addressing this. I also sent out just that little formula, so I think $800 in light of the information you sent is actually quite reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor, I think the number's about right number. The question is whether we want to do an increase now with everything else we've got going on, or whether we want to defer it for 6 months or 12 months, whatever you might want to do. I think that's the options the council's got. I'm pretty relaxed either way.
Yeah.
We've got some wording there depending on whether you want to set the fee now or defer it for 12 months, or set the fee now and defer it to commence from January 21. The benefit of the third one is when we do the recruitment for the replacement member, we can go on that basis, but again, I'm pretty relaxed about which way you want to go.
I think that's the last one, Brett, where we defer it and go to, you know, when we're looking at that recruitment and say this is what it will be. But I think everyone would understand in light of where we are, and everyone's taking haircuts and pay cuts and you know, and freezing. I think it's fair that if we maybe defer it for that period, and then I mean that they're going to be aware of that and understand it, and then so, in that time.
Are we moving the motion and speaking to the motion at this point in time, Mr. Chair?
Well, we can.
Well, we seem to be debating the issue before the motion's actually on the table.
You're quite correct, Joe. This is the first General Committee meeting, so we'll find our way with the.
All right, I'm just clarifying the situation. I'll be happy to move the third recommendation there.
Okay, move Councillor Jurisovic. We have a seconder for that, please.
I'll second it.
Seconded Councillor Stewart. Joe.
Look, I have no qualms with the recommendation here from staff to look at increasing the fee for those 2 external members. I think that's in line with and in keeping with what we see other councils and the norm that is around. But in these challenging times, I think there's a lot of belt tightening going on and some need to at least consider when and if increases in fees and the like are relevant at this relevant and pertinent at this point in time. So I see that for the recruitment process and for the fullness of opportunity in attaining the right type of people towards this position, that announcing the fact that we would increase those fees to something more in keeping with what other councils and other committees would undertake is pertinent. But I think deferring it until we're over most of this COVID issue is probably more in keeping with the expectation of the community.
Thank you, Joe. Now the councillors wish to speak to the motion.
I will. I think
Councillor
it's
Bryan.
important to recognise that the contributions made by the external members are significantly more in value than what they get paid presently or proposed. And in that respect, I think we should acknowledge that their commitment to supporting the good governance of this shire by reducing what probably is a more significant professional fee to participate in the way they do is something that this community is benefiting from, and we should acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yes. True. The councillors wish to speak to the motion. Wish to close, Joe?
I just acknowledge the comments of Councillor Stockwell there. Having sat on the Audit and Risk Committee for the last 2 years, I too acknowledge the contribution that that all members on the Audit and Risk Committee give to the council and to that committee in particular, but the two external members, and to try and keep the quality of applicants that we have in seeking a changeover member for the current chair. I think acknowledging the contribution that those members make to our decision making is pertinent. So.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Move to the next item, which is the amendment to Councillors' Acceptable Request Guidelines. It's also from the Services and Organisation Committee agenda, and it's the first item in
the further report.
Page 3 of the General Committee. Yeah, further report. Councillors, questions for Deb?
I just want to thank you for making the amendments to the Councillors' Acceptable Request Guidelines policy, Deb. I think allowing councillors the discretion to make either a verbal or written request removes the potential associated with only verbal communication. For example, misunderstanding, misrepresentation and denial. Simply, there's no confusion about the message. And councillors, in having the choice of a written reply, also have an opportunity to indicate their understanding of the communication, especially if the language is technical. So again, thank you for addressing my concern.
Once
Thank you.
again,
Okay.
Mr Chair, I'll point out councillors are speaking
Councillor-
to the motion before, not
okay.
asking questions before the
my
motion's
fault.
actually on
I
the
should have
table.
called you. But
So I
Amelia,
ask
would you like
this-
to move that motion?
I would like to move that motion.
Okay. Do we
Thank
have a
you.
seconder, please?
Excuse me. Thanks, Deb.
I'll
I
second.
seconded Joe. Seconded Joe. So Amelia, do you want to say all that again?
As above. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Okay, thanks.
No, I think it's straightforward.
No, look, I'd just like to say that while there's been nothing in the policy that's prevented councillors from gaining advice in either verbal or written form, the additions make this even more explicit. The changes don't in any way change the interactions councillors and staff have in cooperating together to effectively problem solve on behalf of Noosa community members. So it's a good addition. It makes it more explicit, clearer. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, just to clarify that the changes that have been made are in keeping with those that have been recommended by all of the state government agencies that have been dealing with councillor improvements in councillor communications and understandings with regard to the Belcara review. So I'm in favour of the changes that are here, and that clarification there with regard to how councillors may use their discretion, how requests are responded to by staff. I just think it's a clear and concise method for so that there's no doubt there.
Thank you, Joe. Any other councillors wish to speak?
No, I just want to thank Deb for being, for making those changes on our behalf. I think it adds flexibility and it keeps in with collaboration, but I think it also gives peace of mind with asking for the request in writing and or verbally. But I think that flexibility is a great thing. You can just ask something, a very general question quite easily, but you can go into detail. So thank you very much for that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian?
I think overall what Councillor Hughes said was correct. That what we're adjusting the policy overall is to meet the new reform agenda. But it's nothing that's going to change the way we work. How this works in this council is that the respect that both staff pay to councils and councils pay to staff have built a very good relationship, so that information is freely available to councils to make informed decisions. And I think that's one thing that, while this is the guideline, that it's the culture of working together to achieve outcomes for the community, which is the important thing that is embedded within this guideline.
Very important.
Amelia, you wish to close? Oh, sorry, Karen, you wish to speak?
I just reiterate what everyone said at the table. I think what's been proposed is acceptable and provides clear guidelines for communication between the councillors and the staff, and I think that can only result in good outcomes.
Great.
Thank you.
Amelia, you wish to close?
No, just good.
Okay, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
No
Deb.
worries.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.
We move on to item 4, which is Planning and Environment Court appeal, refusal on application for material change of use for service and utility type 3 tower at 244 Tablelands Road, Cooran. And Karen?
I declare a real conflict of interest in this matter as defined in section 175D of the Local Government Act 2009. As prior to my election to council, I signed a petition relating to this application. Thank you.
I'm choosing to leave the room.
And I'm choosing to leave the room based on the Local Government Act.
Good on you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, question, Brian.
As a result of the email I read this morning, I may have a perceived conflict of interest in this matter. We did receive a email from Bill and Christine Taish, who were submitters to the proposal and have elected to become respondents to the appeal. They both assisted with my campaign. I believe I can deal with this issue in a impartial and in the public interest, and would request to remain in the room.
Okay.
So
Well, in that case,
I
I'll
suggest that councillors might want to ascertain how they.
Yeah, I'd like to raise a question.
How they
there.
assisted with a donation or a whatever. If the level would be relevant, I think, in terms of that, if there was a donation of significant.
They did the highly technical job of letterbox delivery in a suburb.
How long have you known them?
I've known them as a result of their relationship with council in the Friends of Lake Wyber. So since the Wyber, was it Wyber on Noosa or Noosa on Wyber campaign, which was towards the end of the amalgamated area, but it's only in that capacity.
Did you understand or were you aware of their position with this application prior to the election, Brian?
Oh, well, they hadn't assisted prior to when the application was being considered.
So did they at any stage express to you that they opposed or?
Certainly they lobbied all
refusal?
councillors before the election year.
Had you had any conversations that say other councils may not have had with these people before the election? No.
Okay. I haven't fully gone over that email. I didn't take note of where they reside in relation to this tower. Do they live in proximity to the tower, and are they impacted by the capacity of this tower to deliver NBN services in the Cooran area?
My understanding is they own a block of land in the locality. However, my understanding is they're still a resident of the Northern Sunshine Coast Council area.
So they're not Noosa residents.
That's my understanding. I couldn't swear to it.
That's my understanding too.
Can I just check the email and see what address they stated as residing in?
Came this morning, John.
Yeah, just trying to find it. Oh, there it is. Sorry, because it was responded to acknowledge there.
It was sent to all councillors, wasn't it, Joe?
It was sent to all councils. They don't actually mention there's only a phone number and no address. So. They do say they're owners, specifically interested, it's owners of property 486 Tablelands Road, Cooran, but don't mention whether they live there or not.
I think the issue here is one of influence. So the fact that they letter dropped for you
this is question time at the moment, because we're going to debate this motion whether Brian stays in the room or not.
Oh, okay.
So that'll be the time to put an opinion.
Okay.
Yeah. How many submissions were there?
442.
Yes, a lot of
442.
Yes.
Of those, approximately 50 lived in the immediate vicinity of Cooran.
Yeah, the email letter today, she said 442 submissions were lodged.
I have a question to the CEO. The fact that any councillors may know submitters, does that create and there's 442, does that create a conflict in itself?
No, the fact that you know someone in the community is not a conflict of interest. It's what relationship you have with that person. And that's why at the beginning I said councillors need to establish what type of support they provide. So for example, if it's a $10,000 donation, well there's no question. So it's a question of degree.
And it is much, as I thought, if people think there is any doubt, I'm happy to leave the room too. I'll probably seek your advice. You know, you always say that if in doubt, get out. I just think in terms of the level of, in this particular decision, we're not deciding anything, we're just deciding to defend an appeal, which they also have.
My advice to council always is, you've done the right thing by speaking out, that's the first thing. When in doubt, speak out. So if there's a potential, you need to declare it. And if there's any doubt, you should get out. That's the other one. So you have that choice. You can choose to leave the room of your own accord, or you can request your colleagues to make that.
I did, but I think it's easier because it's not the substantive issue is not one that's going to bother me.
Okay.
I'll leave the room.
Councillor Stockwell's chosen to leave the room.
I mean, that is a concern though, 442 people, I don't know who those people were to make those submissions, so they might be known to myself or someone else.
The fact that you know someone is not a conflict of interest.
No, but if they may have donated to my campaign, I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
So it is a concern.
And if you don't know, there's you have a due diligence defence in that sense. But if you did know and didn't do anything about it, that's an issue. Or if you should reasonably have known. So if someone gave a donation and said, for example, well, I'm giving you this donation, by the way, if you get onto council, I want you to advocate for this. Well, that's an issue.
Clear.
Okay. Councillors, we've got a motion before us to defend the appeal, but Kerry's here to answer any questions you may have. Councillors?
My only question, Kerry, is the application before us. We requested that it was deferred to this meeting for a decision, just so that the new councillors would be briefed and get up to date with the application. Was the application time sensitive? Did the deferral have any legal implications on the case?
No, it hasn't had any legal implications.
Thank you.
No.
Yeah, my understanding is that this wasn't the only location that a tower could be situated that NBN looked at. Is that correct, or is that planning's understanding?
That's our understanding, and it is the practice of these providers to look at a number of sites in an area before selecting what they consider the most appropriate. That can come down to which landowner is most willing to have a tower located on the site, to the most number of people it can serve. So yes. So
will the reasons that this site, if this goes to appeal, after this vote, is the reasons that particular sites were chosen over other sites likely to come out in that appeal process?
That can be discussed during mediation with the applicant, and will be. In a court situation, though, the judge will look at the merits of the appeal for this site only, and not consider whether there's other sites available. Okay, and whether there were what the merits or otherwise of the sites, the other sites that were potentially available aren't known to council at this point in time either. Sorry, Joe? Are the merits of the other sites or the other sites known to council staff, planning staff, or only this site was
was provided information on.
I'd have to check for you, but it is typical for these providers to give us the details of the other sites they considered.
Okay.
There were 442, what I received this morning, submissions that objecting to the proposal. Were there any that you know of, Kerry, that were supporting it?
No, at the time the application was advertised, we didn't receive any in support. I am aware, though, of a resident who has emailed staff who are supportive of it because they're lacking service in the area.
We have had, the councillors have received, certain councillors received one strong supporter that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Certainly I have only received one submission in favour of the tower due to a lack of services in the area.
So the overwhelming community thought is objection.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, we have a recommendation there. Does anyone care to move it?
I'm happy to move.
Moved Councillor Jurisic, seconded Councillor Lawrenson. Joe?
Look, we've had these submissions come before us. The NBN and the various authorities make their decisions based on their criteria. This clearly doesn't meet our criteria, and as such, perhaps one of the other locations could be more relevant or less controversial to the local community if and when that goes to a process of mediation. So I think at least exploring and examining all the options that are available on the table is one of the things that can happen with through this appeal process, and a more suitable or a more acceptable outcome for the community may be able to be found.
Amelia?
I appreciate and thank Council for accommodating my request for further background details on on this application. I'd also like to add that when I did ask for a deferral, I did check with Council whether there was any legal implications with deferring this item, and I was told, as you just said, Kerry, that there was no, that this application was not time sensitive. In regards to the application, I've visited the site and I've also looked through all the submissions, and these are my observations. That yes, the Noosa plan has got a requirement to ensure that the community is provided with services and infrastructures needed in the current age of technology, but not at the expense of scenic amenity values and rural character of the region. And the planning scheme is very clear on its intent to protect these values. It's clear also by the number of submissions that this proposal simply doesn't meet the expectations of the community, nor the overall intent of the plan. What concerns me is that if this was approved, under the Telecommunications Act 1997, the structure would be afforded immunity, which enables it to extend up to 5 metres more without bringing these changes to Council. And finally, as Joe mentioned, there actually is an opportunity to consider further alternative sites that won't compromise scenic amenity and regional landscape as identified under the South East Queensland Regional Plan. For these reasons, I support Council's recommendation to defend the appeal. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I do too. I mean, I think it's it's loud and clear when 442 submissions are lodged objecting to this. The words of the email we received is quite interesting. It says, it compromises the values and visual amenity of an area that has regionally significant scenic amenity. And I think that's really important to note. And I think with the overwhelming support from the community against this is really clear. You know, in regard to the ability to, if it were approved, for it to increase in height is a concern and something that we can't do anything about and can't be brought back to the table. And as Councillor Jurisic said, there is an opportunity to look for other areas. So, you know, for all those reasons, I too support defending the appeal.
I agree. In defending this appeal, we're fulfilling an obligation to preserve the beauty and scenic amenity of the area and ensure that the communications benefits brought by mobile towers are balanced against the need to preserve this relatively untouched hinterland. The matter is technically already an appeal, and the motion to defend gives the best chance to gain a balanced outcome involving alternative sites, as previously mentioned, that may improve residents' communications while preserving their scenic amenity. I support the motion before us. Joe, you wish to close?
Yeah, look, it's been mentioned that there's 442 objectors now. The one strong supporter in favour of this going ahead has lobbied us extensively, and I will point out that whilst, as he does, the 442 didn't all live locally in the area, a significant number, 50, in the vicinity of 50, do live in the local area and objected to this, and have shown strong support for council's stance on this with regard to visual amenity. So I support that strong support of the community with regards to refusing this location and the possibility of seeking a more suitable alternative.
Okay. Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. CEO.
Unanimous as far as the council in the room.
Yes.
And he just got a quorum.
Yeah.
Oh, you should have seen the cake that was out there.
Stop that. Yeah. Come on, Sunil.
Wherever you're comfortable.
Welcome to.
1.5 metres.
Yeah.
This will be the sound.
We'll move on to item 5, which is a minor change to a development approval for a material change of use premises, entertainment and dining business type 1, food and beverage, and type 2, recreation, amusement and fitness at 4 the Esplanade Sunshine Beach, which is the Sunshine Beach Surf Club. And we have Sunil here today. I had a question of staff. I'm hoping that they could perhaps, it's very technical, this language about sound levels. So Sunil, the approved change is described here in the report as saying what councillors will be consenting to is between 6 AM and 10 PM the adjusted maximum sound pressure level LA10 plus adjustments for tonal and impulse components and seating the background level LA90 by more than 10 decibels, and then in brackets A, and B, between 10 PM and 6 AM, the sound pressure level LOCT10 in a full octave band with centre frequencies from 63 Hz to 2000 Hz, exceeding the background level LOCT90 by more than 8 decibels in any octave band. Could you please explain what we would be...
Oh, come on, come on, Frank!
You're going to explain.
I don't have a clue. We want to know what we're actually consenting to.
Crystal
help me
clear.
understand what it means for the impact on residents who may live nearby Sunshine Beach Surf Club.
Did you hear everything I said? I think the simplest way to understand this is that the human ear does not pick up sounds that are at a very low decibel and a very high decibel, exceeding some levels. You wouldn't be able to hear it. When they use the sound level meter, what they're trying to do with the A level or C level measurements is trying to exclude those higher level or lower level sounds that you can't generally hear. Because if they measure that, then it basically gives you an inaccurate or incomplete in terms of how the human ear responds to a specific noise that can cause health issues or can cause immunity issues like lack of sleep, etc. So the weighting that they're using is basically trying to rule out those other high level, high pitched sounds that maybe dogs or other animals can hear that the human can't pick up. So it measures specifically sound emanating from a source like a big speaker that you might have and its impact on the human ear during our normal hearing. In other words, things that we can hear. The basically the sea level weighting is sometimes you have flatter or sound frequencies, and those flatter sound frequencies that comes out, like for example a bass speaker will be quite flat. And what the reading does, or the measurement tool does, it tries to rule out that flatter sound and basically gives you an average hearing over a period of time. Therefore, they say LA10. 10% of the time, that flatter sound has breached the requirements of more than 90 decibels that can affect the ear. Or they say LA90, which means that 90% of the time, those flatter sounds will be able to impact on the ear, because if you hear flatter noises, bass noises all the time, 90% of the time, it's likely to not only annoy you but likely to affect your hearing. in some way or form. Therefore, people use ear mufflers and ear plugs, etc., when they're exposed to these high frequencies. My assessment when I did this review for the acoustic report was basically that we had in council a clause 8 that was saying that you could have a noise level up to 90 dBAs. Now the decibels measured on this A weighting average. That rules out high frequency and low frequency noises. In other words, to get the accurate reading in the meter. So the 90 decibels that we set in that clause 8 or the condition 8 basically didn't take into account this new extension to the building, outdoor dining, putting a speaker outside, etc. And therefore we're saying that if we have to now recalculate what minimum values are acceptable now that they've expanded the clubhouse, more dining, and probably these speakers, the way they're placed, will create more sound going out to the neighboring residents. I think it's to the east and some to the southeast of that building where there's residents are living close by, unlike the other surf clubs where it might be slightly different. So we specifically evaluated this surf club and not try to compare those readings. In analyzing the readings from the acoustic engineer, what I found was that for several of their readings between the time up to 10 o'clock, there were breaches. In other words, they've gone beyond 90 decibels. So, I mean, if we have to set 90 decibels, they'll breach it almost every time they have a karaoke band or they have a rock band, for example. They'll breach the conditions, and that creates a problem. So what we thought is, rather than us recreating new standards in terms of how far they can go, what we agreed was that let's use the liquor licensing conditions. That basically is a standard condition across Queensland that sets limits and levels. And what they've set is 90 decibels, which is the minimum. And I could say that 90 decibels would be the background noise when you look at background noise before you calculate.
It's a conversation.
That's right. This is patron noise,
yeah,
and general light entertainment noise. Music that's light and patron noise up to 100 people in this venue will give you a background of 90 decibels. So
how close to the source though? 3 meters from the source?
3 meters from the source, so 3 meters from that speaker when you measure it, or whichever side you measure it from, but 3 meters from the source when you measure it. Yes, the residents are much further than that, but basically anything over 90 decibels up to 100 decibels, like the liquor licensing conditions are proposing, or they have set a standard already, would be reasonable up to 10 p.m. And I think that's what we were saying. Beyond 10 p.m. we think that this would create a disturbance and an unnecessary annoyance for the residents around that area. So I think for us is setting the liquor licensing conditions and adhering to that has some benefits for council. In other words, the enforcement, if there's complaints, will be liquor licensing rather than the environmental health team officers, which is a huge resource implication to go out, measure the noise, check the complaints, get some readings from residents about the complaints, etc. So there's some benefits in that. And our intention is to more and more align conditions, so two agencies are not working with different conditions.
So is this more stringent than what was originally proposed? The condition 8, there's a condition 8 on page 15 of the report, which was the original conditions. And on page 13, as part of the recommendation, there's new conditions. Are the new conditions more stringent?
No. Because of we set
differ?
90 decibels, and this one goes up to 100 decibels, up to 10 p.m. So they allowed a 10 decibel difference for entertainment noise. Now a standard rock band in itself will give you 100 decibels of emission generally with all the things they use. So I think for us is, like I was saying, is because we didn't consider entertainment, outside entertainment or noise emissions from that kind of entertainment, we had to shift slightly in terms of aligning with the OLGR.
This is an acoustic, liquor and gaming regulation. do they police that then, Neil? Are they the ones then? And how often do they do that? Do you know that?
Only for complaints. I think if there's complaints, then they respond to customer complaints or neighbourhood complaints, and they follow that up. There's stringent requirements for that in terms of a noise management plan for these businesses, so they record and frequently test the noise emissions coming out of there. So there are some conditions that set out in the liquor licensing for them to go through and make sure that the noise is within the restricted levels.
And they'd obviously be used to doing this. I mean, this is just, they've been doing this for a number of venues.
Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned sound limiting devices. I mentioned.
Yes, we because the acoustic engineer who's recognized in terms of the law suggested that in the absence of a sound level a meter, that a limiting device, that they can measure the noise periodically. And what we thought is, for a business this size and the amount of activities and entertainment they're likely to have, they should have a sound limiting device built in that records automatically sound over a period of time, and we have access to that, or OLGR officers have access to that, so they can check. Because if a person complains and it's one-off, then you're not necessarily going to fine them. You're going to check how often this kind of transgression is taking place. So that was our recommendation. It makes it a lot easier for that business in terms of complying, but also to have evidence that they can store. And I think if they check their own records, they're able to then start to make adjustments, like put baffles or look at retreating the environment, to try and contain that noise.
I assume that will also ensure that in the event that a complaint is received before the Office of Liquor and Gaming get there, that someone hasn't turned the sound down to say, well, I don't know what they're complaining about. We've just, there's no noise problem here, but it just that there isn't an adjustment to the volume while when a complaint is received before the officers arrive, perhaps.
Yes, and I think probably yes, but I think also that because you have workers in these facilities, they need to comply with the occupation or the workplace regulations in terms of exposure to noise. Now, these workers who work, they will be more exposed because of their time period. They work there often. It's not like me going in to have dinner or a dance and I get away. Probably would take some noise inside. But they're exposed to this all the time. So I think in terms of the limits that we're setting and agreeing with the old GR, it's also considering those people that are likely to be exposed over a longer period of time. And if they work there for 30 years or more, it's basically it will impact them. And if somebody screams in your ear every day, so you'll probably need to have a hearing test very often.
More questions if I may. Lower frequencies are my concern, Sunil, with regard to lesser requirements on controlling those noises, because that's the one we often get complaints about. It's more a felt noise, those bass frequencies, that doof 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 sort of sound, and those sounds that are more felt as much as heard. In many instances, how does this your suggestion, or from what I'm hearing with what you're saying there, is there's less control over those bass sounds through these sort of measures than would otherwise be the case? Is that
provided that the noise emitted from source, when measured, is within these requirements of 90 dBA plus 8 or 10 that they give them as over the 90 dBA. So
90 dBA, and I know this is difficult for the layman to understand, but what are the other background noise levels that we may have in dBA that might be around, conversation, the sort of noise you'd have from dinner being held in a restaurant, the surf, and those other things. What sort of other background noise levels could we have, and what sort of levels they typically undertake?
Yes, so basically it's on loading and the number of people sitting within a confined space. So let's take as an example 100 people sitting in a restaurant. You're likely to get in the region of 80 decibels of noise consistently. However, as the evening goes by and people have a few more drinks, that is likely to go up. So therefore, this benchmark limit of saying you've got a background noise generally of 80 dBAs, but actually you've got to manage it within this. So what they've done in this report, they're trying to get basically to go till 12 o'clock, and that's the issue here, is that we said no 10 o'clock, is because if you remove 10 people, which they did in their calculation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to reduce the noise level.
The longer time goes, the more
Correct, and the longer time that we go, the more conversation we have, we get more bolder, as you might say. So I think that's one. Two is that if you take a karaoke and singing in a karaoke, depends on size as well, you would get a normal sound of just above 95 dBAs. Karaoke, and I think I stated that somewhere in my response. And if you take a rock band, generally a rock band in a venue like the Surf Club here, you'll get 105 dBAs. So what they've done here is they've managed it by putting some shutters and baffles closer to the residential facing area. I think it's the southeast area. So they put some baffles in there and then measured it. So what they're doing is using environmental conditions to reduce that noise. If you take a rock concert, outdoor concert, you're likely to reach 110 decibels of noise. So as you increase your activity, you get better noise. But in terms of background noise for ordinary residents, we're wanting to keep that below 70 decibels, especially at night. If you're wanting to have a good sleep, then you need peace and quiet. And therefore we set as council some other rules, like you can't use a blower before 7 in the morning, because that sound will be greater than the background noise and people will start complaining because they can't sleep. But those are some examples. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Question for Kerry. Given that this is the first time we're implementing Office of Liquor and Gaming regulation sound limitations to a venue, is this likely to be the norm in the future with regard to noise limitations? I don't believe we've done it in the past.
It's preferred where we can, because they are better at compliance in respect to noise.
Well, they are the compliance. They are the compliance officers.
Yeah,
I understand.
They have more
not?
experience in that. They're better equipped to be out there at night time when this is occurring. There may be some instances where we find it's not appropriate, and we actually think a more stringent requirement should apply. But I think.
So if we find that these measures do not address noise issues for residents, what provision have council got then to make any changes?
Well, the conditions stand, so they will be the conditions. The conditions are the conditions if council goes with this. I have to go back to see if there's a general condition around amenity, but they will be the conditions.
So my question for the local residents, if they find their amenity is continuing to be disturbed, what actions can they take and approach council on to alter these conditions?
Council would not be able to alter the conditions once we make the decision. That is the development approval. So we can only alter the conditions if the applicant agreed. The residents' course of action, if there's a noise issue, would be either to contact council or liquor licensing, and either party can do compliance on the current conditions. So
liquor licensing would have the capability of saying that you are, well, if they're not being breached, no recourse to have that sound turned down in any way, shape or form? That's right. If they're not breaching their conditions, there's no recourse there. Okay. So if they're not breaching the conditions and we're getting a lot of complaints, that's something we'd have to have a discussion with the Surf Club about being good neighbours and seeing what measures they could put in place to try and minimise it. All right, so the neighbours still have some recourse if it continues on. To some extent, so again, do we think that this will be the standard that we now implement across entertainment venues, particularly with the new planning scheme and areas like the junction where we're looking at? Yeah, as I've said, I think it is desirable to be consistent and reflect liquor licensing conditions because they're a better place to do compliance. But there still may be instances where we think a more stringent requirement should apply. And we'll have to consider that each one in its own case. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's to you, Kerry. Sunil mentioned that there is one difference in this condition to the previous one is the requirement for a sound limiting device. And I always think about the what is it, a parable? You can't manage what you don't measure. Now we've included similar conditions in other uses where noise could be an issue, where they have to measure it. And do we find that it's a successful technique in terms of curbing problem noise.
Yes, the ones where they are conditioned to have a sound limiting device, I don't think we've had complaints about.
So that's probably the
ones that
major
have-
step forward in terms of the community outcome.
Yeah, it's a good outcome in terms of regulating noise.
Mhm.
The older ones that don't have such a condition, then we tend to have more problems with.
When did council start putting that sort of condition on? It's not something fairly recent, is it?
No, it's not. It is more recent, probably around 2008, 2007, around that time. Would that be right, Sunil?
Yes.
Yep. We didn't see those sort of devices until around that time.
We did it on Bounce Hostel.
Yeah, well, but they're not
Dance
operating.
studio.
They're not operating as yet, so it's a bit hard to judge them.
Dance studio in the industrial estate. What else we did?
Have we had many noise complaints from the area in regard to the surf club?
No, haven't had any.
Are there other entertainment? Are there other entertainment venues where we have implemented the?
Ooh, I think the Noosa Head Surf Club has a similar condition, but I'd have to go back and check. Do you recall, Sunil, any others?
Anywhere in the junction at all?
We get a few complaints from nightclubs and where there's in Hastings Street, for example. Yeah, we get complaints and basically we follow those up. Most of the cases have been in conjunction with OLGR offices. Is trying to manage that.
I'm just trying to ascertain whether any other entertainment venues have had this methodology, because I do recall us doing it with Bounce, the Bounce Hostel in Noosaville and other localities. I can't recall, and we have had entertainment venues before us having that sound measuring device as part of their conditions before. So that's why I was trying to clarify that point.
Yeah, I'd have to take that on notice, Joe, and see if I can find some for you.
That'd be good if we could have that before Thursday's meeting.
Yep.
The other question I had for forgotten it. That's all right. All right, we'll come back to it.
I just have a question with regards to the noise complaints from other precincts. You said that this is a new thing where we're introducing or discussing the compliance coming through gaming and liquor. So those other venues mentioned around like the Junction and the Noosa Surf Club, how is compliance at the moment met in those venues when the complaints come?
So it's what's more recent or new, if you like, is the sound limiting device. That's the new
I
thing.
understand that. So the question is
but
how
in terms
is compliance met
in
at
terms
the
of
moment?
compliance,
if it's not under liquor, how is it addressed?
So for some time there's been coordination or work with liquor licensing around these venues. There's a process of referral of liquor licensing to council where we have the opportunity to request liquor license to include conditions or reflect our conditions or our hours of operation. So there is work done between the two areas to ensure there's a consistent approach and conditions are followed through. There's been a range of approaches over the year based on best practice at the time in terms of controlling noise. There's some venues in the Junction that may not have any conditions on them, just because they commenced at a time, in the early 80s or 70s, and there wasn't the knowledge around the importance of placing some of these conditions on them. So it's only in more recent times where these sorts of conditions have been going on, entertainment type venues. I'd suggest that they've been fairly effective because we're not getting the complaints, particularly those venues that have that sound limiting device on them, because they can self-regulate to a certain extent.
So moving forward then, with the recommendation of moving towards, with this venue at Sunshine Surf Club, we're recommending gaming and liquor officers now take over that role. What's the rationale behind that?
We're not recommending they take over that role. We're reflecting their condition on our approval. So we've got a bit of consistency between the two areas in terms of regulation. And so both parties could take action in the future.
Okay,
so both liquor
parties,
licensing or council would be able to act on complaints if we receive them in the future.
Okay. So say I'm a resident living around that area and the noise is increasing and I ring say, council in the first instance and it's 10 o'clock at night, how's that process going to roll out?
Yeah. Sorry.
So it goes directly to police?
Yes. And police, if you're a member of the public living in house, there's a disturbance, you'll ring the police at that time. In normal compliance protocol is that you'll have to fill in a noise log. In other words, the date, time this happened, and it needs to be repeated noise. So you'll have to do at least 10 entries on a page. If we investigate it, we send out a noise log. So you put all those details. It comes back to us. We look at that and then continue investigating with that premise to like check their sound levels, etc. A similar procedure with the liquor and gaming. You can't take one incident and prosecute or go to court.
Yeah.
So they look at it in terms number of complaints, and then we'll have to put in some devices once we've got that log to measure noise as well, background noise at that person's house, and also measure the actual noise from the similar events before we can conclude either way that yes, there's a problem or not. So those processes are fairly robust.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't know my other question. So Neil mentioned something about speakers outside and the like. From my understanding, experience in council, we typically don't permit amplified sound outside of venues like this, or limit it to times so that they can't impede on the noise or create a noise that isn't acceptable outside of the venue. Is that the case in the surf club's approval?
Yeah, so that's it's difficult to control noise when it's outside. So you can look at directing the direction the speakers face, but ours is primarily what you're using, or the type of equipment, amplified music outside.
Ensuring doors are closed by a certain time.
That's right. So we typically control it by hours, and this has a condition on them for hours.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that when you mentioned outdoor sound.
Yep.
By moving it all to sort of liquor and gaming, does it provide a sort of, I guess, a more succinct way to go about it for the surf club? Like, is it easier for them from a due diligence rather than sort of having to adhere to us and then the opposite? Is this a one-stop shop, and does it make it more, I guess, effective for them?
Certainly, it's the applicant's preference that they're just dealing with one body rather than two, and they're not keen to have different requirements by different bodies who are regulating noise. So from their perspective, it's their preference.
Okay. Thank you.
And I know it's not relative to this, but with regard to that sound limiting device, is that something that if we continue to get noise complaints at other venues, we could look at retrospectively applying a condition to if it's an ongoing issue?
Yeah, we can't apply conditions retrospectively. In the future, if they come to us for expansion or change, there may be an opportunity then to impose a further condition. But once an approval is issued, there's limited opportunity to do that. We can work with the venue if we're getting complaints and try and encourage them to do so.
Suggest that this could be a methodology to deal with those complaints.
But we can't necessarily insist on it.
Thank you.
Right, councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Anyone care to move that? Move, councillor. Is this a question, Amelia, or would you like to move it?
Well, I'd like to move a motion to defer this motion until further information's attained. Do I do that now, Frank?
Yeah.
Well.
And can I explain why?
Sure.
Okay.
And you need to move on a second before she can explain why.
Okay. So I'd like to move a motion to defer this motion until further information is attained.
Is there any information? We've got the experts here now. What information do you need?
I think I've done a little bit of research, so I'd like to explain why I'm moving this motion to defer.
That'll be speaking to the motion.
So
we need to move
I'll
on a second or not to check,
for
Mr.
you.
Thank
Chair.
you. Yeah.
I'll second. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll just get the wording right.
Oh, okay.
Amelia.
Just to defer consideration until further information is attained. I'll
I'll need to clarify a question.
Yeah, no, that just normally we put defer to the next round of meetings or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's.
Is that,
okay.
is there a time issue in terms of this request? It's not a deemed.
It's not a deemed approval, but obviously we will be outside our time frame if we defer it to the next round. So depending on the information, we may be able to provide it before the ordinary.
My main concern is why the Surf Club has made this request. To me, this appears to be a concession, and the beneficiary is actually the applicant, not the community. We're talking about an industry standard versus a community standard, and I just think there would be more benefits to have a community standard as opposed to an industry standard. Therefore, for me to allow or consider any concessions or changes to this approval, I'd actually like to revisit some facts, or what I call 4 red flags about this newly constructed surf club. The first is that, again, these are concerns, that the surf club has doubled their gross floor area. They've, number 2, reduced the number of car parks for visitors. Number 3, they've tripled their patronage. Number 4, they've created a parking nightmare for existing businesses and residents. And 5, they've eroded residential amenities due to increased noise from car parking, traffic, and outdoor noise. Therefore, for me to consider the application before me, I'd actually like an impact assessment report to be provided before any concessions. And this is what I call this application, a concession to be afforded to the surf club. And the following information and data I'd like is the total complaints that made to council since the surf club has opened, total complaints made to the police since opening, feedback from residents and surrounding businesses, and the total fines issued for parking from our local laws department. The noise standard in this approval should address all of the above, including, we should be looking at council at including further conditions that may alleviate the 4 red flags that I've just brought up. It's critical to get this data to fully understand the impact of noise on the residential amenity within residential zones and business zones. In front of us, councillors, we've actually got an opportunity to put in place strategies and conditions to manage noise issues so as to protect residential amenity while still allowing the surf club to flourish. This is what I see a leveraging opportunity that we cannot let slip by. So I'm moving to defer this motion until all that information is attained and we can further discuss.
Question for staff. My understanding is with the approval there are existing sound requirements in the list of the approvals there. This is being considered as a relaxation. Is there any opportunity here, given that that application has been approved, to alter the conditions that the surf club currently operates under?
Yeah, so the surf club obviously has an approval for the extensions. With that application came the impact assessment report that was lodged. It was lodged with that application and considered by council at the time. Today, council is limited in terms of what they can look at. They can only respond to the proposed change. They can't try and look at addressing additional car parking or traffic issues that might be perceived to have happened. The time has passed for that. That's not related to the requested change.
No, but the approval, what we allow, whether it's through...
Sorry, we're in formal debate now.
Okay.
Yeah. Question, you can pose a
question. In terms of the subset of Councillor Lawrence's requests in terms of assessments, is there enough time before Thursday's meeting to get a list of noise complaints since the new operation has occurred?
We can certainly look at what complaints council has received since it commenced operations in January. We can contact the police to see if they're able or willing to provide us with a list. But in terms of the other information, no, there wouldn't be sufficient time to do that before Thursday.
Are we also able to obtain what actions have been requested by Officers of Liquor and Gaming with regard to those complaints, and what actions have been undertaken by the Surf Club to deal with those complaints?
Had experience before with liquor licence in that they won't share the details of complaints for privacy reasons. So
Could we ask the applicant what actions they may have taken to deal with any complaints received up until?
we can ask the applicant, yes.
But you're not, are you aware of any complaints, police complaints?
No, we've had no complaints.
Yes.
Sunil, I have, in your opinion, in your expert opinion, what the applicants are asking for in regards to noise levels, how will that affect, that will, in comparison to what they currently have and what we're currently looking at, what will that overall effect be? Is it a minor effect, is it a minor change that the noise is not going to increase that much, or is it, I mean, how will it impact, in your opinion, people around that area?
My opinion is that the impact will be minor in the sense of what we are agreeing to here. Instead of 95 decibels at a maximum or 90 decibels, they are asking for 8 decibels higher and up to a maximum of 10 decibels higher for 10% of the time. My view is that this won't impact the residents on the eastern side or the other side of the building at its closest point, any more than it would do if we maintain our similar conditions. But what it does is, because of the size of the building now, like I said, is our condition was when they had not done these extensions for their proposed activities. So all we could consider is what the proposed activity is and whether or not that noise limitations are suitable up to 10 o'clock.
So what we're dealing with on the table today, and what we can decide upon, in your opinion, the differences are minor.
Absolutely. But just to clarify is that we in the report we assessed the acoustic engineer's report, which I did, and that report didn't account for the questions that are being raised in terms of additional information. It didn't measure the traffic noise. It didn't measure the other
Outside
noises and
noise,
car traffic noise, etc.
No,
So
it didn't.
what they did is basically looked at background noises to residents and what's the normal background noises there at any given time during their measurement period, without this club being fully operational. So I wouldn't be able to comment on that unless we get those levels and impact.
But I think it's important to say that what we're being asked to look at here is a change to condition that doesn't manage traffic noise. That was part of the original application consideration then. That's not relevant to this application before us. We're restricted by the planning application in terms of what we can look at. If we had those concerns, we would have had to have looked at it with the original application when lodged.
Right.
I'm moving an amendment. Amendment is and defer consideration of the application until the ordinary meeting on Thursday night, whatever the date is.
2021.
Okay. We have a seconder for that, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can't
Okay,
either.
you
Karen. Karen can't either. Will you?
Oh, look, for the exercise debate, I'll second the.
Seconded by Councillor Noosaville. Brian?
I do so because I think in terms of this application, what staff have really identified is the context within which this application is made is very narrow. That the legislation is very prescriptive on what we can and can't do. We can't go back and do an impact assessment. We can only look at issues relative to what would change with this particular condition. I think it's reasonable to ask to see whether there was any complaints about noise and what the results of those complaints were for the period that it was open since the new structure is open. But I think there's plenty of time to get whatever information is likely to be able to be available before Thursdays to allow that information to be shared.
One would think that noise is noise. It doesn't matter where the noise comes from. I mean, a car backfiring or a car horn firing off, or people in the...
What's the question, Joe? Or
yes, the question is how.
No, you're expressing an opinion, mate.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to allude to the question.
Well, cut to the chase, please.
Is noise noise? I mean, is all of this noise understood and incorporated in the understanding of what noise is measured when noise is measured?
Like I said before, is that yes, you'd get all kinds of noises at different parts of the day or night. Might be one-off, but what you look at here is the noise over a period of time and the consistency of the noise and the exposure. So if this club is operating, or this surf club operates every day, it means that people will be exposed to that.
So it doesn't matter what form of noise takes, that noise is measured and calculated in the calculations here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillors, the amendment before us is whether we defer this to Thursday night. Any other councillors wish to express an opinion whether it's deferred to Thursday night or a different date?
And just be specific, so that's the staff and bring back information, particularly around noise complaints, around council, police, if we can get those, or whatever information we can get.
Yeah.
Look, I'm happy to support the amendment to defer it to the ordinary meeting. I don't think that makes any difference on the process here. It just means that we don't have to make a recommendation from this committee going forward, and that we can make a final decision on Thursday night, as we have the opportunity to do at any stage anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just make it?
Yes, Karen.
Do I have to ask a question now?
No, you can speak to the amendment,
Okay.
or you can ask a question.
The amendment, not the applicant.
So in the applicant's request, they state that the acoustic testing criteria determines the maximum permitted noise level, and they want to make sure that it's unreasonable, that it wouldn't be considered unreasonable in the terms S187 of the Liquor Act in 1992. My concern is from a comment that when I asked you a question about how we get the compliance, and your answer back to me was that we want a consistent approach and both parties can act. Then someone else asked a question and you actually said that the liquor licensing people are reluctant to share information. So my concern is moving forward, if I'm, Mrs. Brown up the road, this has been an ongoing issue. We have approved this and the licensing people take over, management of this, and they're reluctant to share information. How moving forward is the council going to address ongoing complaints back to council to get everyone back at the table to find equitable outcomes for the community living in the area when their amenity, which is what we're looking at, is it unreasonable, and how do we resolve those issues?
Good question.
So and I think that's a good question, is that because the privacy and other pieces of legislation apply to the information we collect, and that should be used for the purposes it's collected. It's same like if somebody makes a request to us about details. So it's something that we work with the other agencies about, is how much you can share of that kind of information without disclosing personal information or identifiers. But here in council, we in environmental health, for example, we have some general powers, and those powers under the Public Health Act is to ensure that we can maintain well-being of people. We have often used those general powers when there's other agencies involved. And basically saying that a member of the public seems to be impacted, we want to now consider what the health impact is as well as the well-being impact. So there's nothing stopping us from using those pieces of legislation to deal with these issues. And I can say that the Public Health Act, for example, has some clout over some of these regulations. For example, Regulation 40. If somebody is complaining that, listen, we're not getting the kind of satisfaction we need from a government agency, we can use that Public Health Act, which we designated for, to call for a more discussion or call for a resolution to that, including making sure that the member of the public receives a satisfactory answer, or those issues are mitigated sufficiently. So yes, there might be conditions and district approvals, etc. But we have some other powers that we could use to make those interventions.
Councillors, are you happy for this matter to be deferred to the ordinary meeting?
Yeah.
Kim, you have.
Sorry, can I just further to Councillor Kinslow's question? Can I just get Sunil or Kerry to clarify that in fact the change to this condition isn't that we're passing on the compliance to the Office of Liquor and Gaming, that the condition still sits on their planning approval, so that we both have an enforcement and compliance role, but it's an alignment with the state, the Office of Liquor and Gaming standard, and there's a link to their liquor licence, and therefore they also have a compliance and enforcement role.
That's right.
Correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, that leads to a further question then.
Thank you.
If we don't have the capability of measuring sound in the way that the Office of Liquor and Gaming regulation do, how do we then obtain that information? I think is what the question that Karen was
just to correct that, we do have capability to measure. So we have the devices that we need to measure. If it's too resource intensive to go out at 10 at night, etc., then we can always get a recognized independent qualified practitioner to do that on our behalf. So I think we have those accesses to make that happen.
Okay. If there's no more talk on the amendment, we'll put the amendment. Those in favour? That's unanimous. We go back to the original motion. So the amendment now becomes the motion, that the motion be the matter be deferred to the ordinary meeting on Thursday night. Amelia is the only one who's spoken to this. Is there any further debate on this, or we leave it for Thursday night?
Yes.
Okay, put the motion. Those in favour? Against, the motion's carried unanimously. Councillors, I'd like to call a 5-minute adjournment.
Toilet break.
Toilet break.
It's not about the
This is
time
good.
frame.
Yeah,
Because this will help you.
As you talk.
Okay.
We're being very generous in this one, I have to
This
say.
time round, Josephine.
All right, councillors, we're back.
I'm not going to do it.
We're back.
Shame me into it.
Welcome back, viewers. And we're up to item 6, which is an application to extend the currency period of development approval for a duplex dwelling and operational works at 5 Park Crescent, Sunshine Beach. Welcome, Tara. Thank you for your report. Councillors, do you have any questions for Tara about her report?
Just going through at the moment.
Yeah, I do. I take it from reading the report there's been considerable objection from the owners of number 7.
No, so that there was a combined, it wasn't a combined application, but it had previously been owned by the same owners.
And then it was sold.
It was
so
sold separately.
Yeah.
The design was together, so they'd been told over the years, the new owners, look, they kind of rely on each other for them to work. Number 5 lodged the request to extend, number 7 didn't. So I did let them know that their application had actually lapsed and they had wanted to maybe look at doing an extension at that point, but unfortunately under the legislation you can't sort of do a retrospective once it's lapsed, revive it. So I'd let them know that it's lapsed and they didn't really have any...
They had no issues with them with number 5 going ahead?
There was no comment on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So just clarifying, on an application like this, there's no opportunity for submitters or objections?
Not for the extension, no.
Tara, what other reasons other than funds and waiting for the right to market conditions has the applicant put forward this?
That was it.
That was it. So they're not relying on any regulations under the Noosa plan, under the planning scheme, nothing. No. So they're sole reasons. Okay.
Yes.
And just to confirm, how long has development application been before council? Sorry, approval.
So it was approved in
the original
2006.
So
yeah,
14 years they've had to undertake works on this site.
Can I just clarify something on page 21 with Tara? It just says that it, under the Noosa Plan 2006, the proposal does not comply with the building height and stories. But then here it says, it is however noted that development is consistent with the carriage over streets, surrounding buildings being predominantly 3 and 4 stories in height.
yes.
Okay.
So yeah, so a lot of that area was developed prior to the current scheme.
Okay.
So the definition of basements was different under the previous scheme. So what they designed was under the previous scheme. It was approved under the previous scheme. So basically, it's quite consistent to look at with what is around that area.
I'm happy to move the staff recommendation.
I'll second. Move Councillor Stockwell, seconded Councillor Juricevic. Councillor Stockwell.
Oh, I think this one's fairly black and white. Having 14 years to action a development approval is, I think, very generous to start with. There's a range of non-compliance with the way we currently look at development in accordance with both the 2006 scheme and what is proposed in the new scheme, and therefore it's appropriate that any future development of the site should be in keeping with the planning scheme in force at the time of that development.
Joe?
Yeah, it's clear that the approval granted here involved an approval that had implications for both sites, that not only this site but the adjoining site, and now that the sites are being sold, the potential for impact on the adjoining premises is evident. Again, 14 years has undergone, and obviously there's a change in circumstances associated with this. So I think I support the staff recommendation in going forward, in that both applications need to be assessed on their own merits.
Yeah, I'd support it as well. Look, as Councillor Stockwell said, 14 years. If I'm correct, there's been 5 extensions, which is very generous. It doesn't comply with the definition of a basement, doesn't comply with the height in stories, and bearing in mind that this was very much looked at when given first approval, the two together. So on that basis, I vote in accordance with what staff recommended.
The duplex was given preliminary approval in 2006 under the superseded planning scheme, an extension for 2 years in April 2010, another extension in 2012 to 2014, and other extensions from 214 to 216, 216 to 218, and 218 to 220. As other councillors have said, there's been more than enough time to develop according to the original conditions. Since then, the development no longer meets the standards required under the existing or draft planning scheme. The original approvals reduced side boundary setbacks have the potential to severely impact the amenity of its neighbouring property. The duplex would present as 4 stories, and duplexes would not be consistent with the new planning scheme's intention for the area. I support the recommendation. Any other councillors wish to speak? Brian, do you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Tara.
Thanks, Tara.
We've got another one for you.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah, you're on a roll. Okay, this is item 7, development application for reconfiguring one lot into 2 lots at 216 Black Mountain Road, Black Mountain. Questions, councillors?
Yeah, question if I may.
Yes, Joe.
Page 46, paragraph at the bottom states, proposed lot is not an appropriate area to provide intended use on the site, being a rural residential lot due to topography, proposed house site located on a steep slope. The proposed house site at 300 square metres also does not comply with the specific outcome 01, table 1469, which requires a minimum house site area of 1,000 square metres. I'm assuming that the minimum house site of 1,000 square metres in an area such as this is to allow for appropriate effluent disposal, given that there is no water and sewage or no sewage in the area.
Predominantly, yeah.
Thank you. Second question. In the draft planning scheme, where it mentions in page 49, minimum lot size under the draft planning scheme has been reduced to 1.5 hectares and a minimum lot of 30 metres. So under the draft planning scheme, the minimum lot sizes are acceptable, but under the existing planning scheme, they're not.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. But either way, under both planning schemes, 1,000 square metres is still the minimum house lot size?
I'd have to check under the draft scheme. The bigger issue, I guess,
that was the follow-on question that came into my head, is that it's consistent with 1,000 square metres, because I think that's still the minimum footprint for effluent disposal, from memory.
I'll have to check, but with the current lot design, we did have discussions with the applicant about the 1.5 and the draft scheme, and that it would maybe be considered.
Or if you could clarify before Thursday's meeting that the lot size for effluent disposal is still a minimum of 1,000 square metres, that would be appreciated. My recollection is that didn't change with the draft planning scheme.
Yeah, the requirement for steep slope didn't change.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Right.
So just a question, generally capability assessment for effluent disposal areas on very steep land like this requires significantly larger or different treatment. Is that something our scheme differentiates on? Or?
Our current scheme doesn't differentiate on that. I'd have to check the new scheme.
But potentially, the likelihood of the effluent coming out down the slope increases, so therefore you tend to have.
Yeah, and what you sometimes find on these sites is they end up going to pump out because it can't work.
Yeah, one would think on a steep
Which
slope
is an
that
expensive
the run downhill would be into a water, would likely be into a waterway.
If there's a waterway nearby, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got a question, Tara. Just on page 46, the proposal does not comply with the above provisions of reconfiguring a lot because it's the minimum 2 hectares, but under the new Noosa plan, it does comply, doesn't it? Because it's 1.5 hectares.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Councillor, if that was the only issue with this application, it's one that we would recommend approval for, given the new scheme is substantially advanced, and it's not considered that's likely to change. But there's more issues with this one.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So the steep slope is
the steep slope is the issue.
Deal breaker.
Yeah.
And the Koala, South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy. Can you talk a little bit about the koala priority areas, Kerry?
There's a koala habitat area. Is that what you're?
The core habitat area. Yeah. The subject site's now mapped as a koala priority area and contains a portion of core habitat area.
So on page 45, there is there's an excerpt from the mapping from the state regulation around koala habitat, which shows that the whole site is priority area, but only part of it is core koala habitat area. So the development wouldn't be prohibited under that. It would have to be, you'd have to be removing vegetation from the core koala habitat area for it to be prohibited. Okay. In a priority area, there would just be conditions typically set if council wanted to approve this development.
So my question's probably to the director, because it's a strategic planning question. In the review of the scheme, we did reduce the lot size, and particularly that affected this area around the Black Mountain Range Road, Black Mountain Road. There is a significant area that would appear to have the ability to make 1.5 hectare lots, but have the similar level of constraint in quantum of steep land. So the question is this a significant issue that we have to consider in terms of setting precedents for future subdivision applications in that area?
You're right, we have
Can you come a bit closer so
Sure.
people might
Yeah.
hear? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Stockwell. Yes, there has been a general reduction in the lot size in the new planning scheme, and this area is one of them, but that the reduction in subdivision size still requires consideration of constraints, land constraints, steep slope being one of them, biodiversity being another, flooding being another. So the reduced subdivision size does allow for some potential in some areas, but it doesn't actually make some difference in other areas because of the land constraints that do exist in some of those areas. Yes, you're correct.
Is that to do with the landslide hazards?
There's a number of constraints in some of these areas. It might be, in this one it's sloping sites and landslips one of them, but in other areas other constraints may still exist even though you've got a reduced subdivision size, which may mean that you don't have further development potential anyway. We've actually done an analysis. Some sites don't have further subdivision potential because of the constraints, but some sites do.
Thank you.
Councillors, there's no further questions. Anyone care to move the recommendation?
Oh, happy to
Councillor
again.
Stockwell,
I'll second.
seconded by Councillor Juricevic.
Before you go there.
Brian,
I'm just
you have
trying
the
to
floor.
the only move. Yeah, I think this is a really important decision. As I said, in the advertising of the draft scheme, there was quite a lot of people concerned about the potential of the reduction in rural residential size lots and what that might mean for increasing development. And when we researched this, we identified that you had to be within the rural living area. I think that's what it's called under the SEQ regional plan. And you also had in this particular area large lots that were there because they were very steep land. The figure of 25% is a very well established figure in terms of suitability for rural residential subdivision. In fact, my first job as a planner was a subdivision planner, and the first policy change I made was to adopt that 25% limit in rural residential subdivisions in 1991. The slopes are getting up here towards 33%. In fact, that gets to about the limit of where you want to put stock on in terms of the level of hazard at 35%. I start recommending to people who don't put stock on slopes that high. So they are not just for the mass movement, but also for general erosion, as I said, for managing the water processes with effluent areas, and for a range of reasons, not the least of is the utility of the lots you're creating. If you have to do huge cut and fills, which creates an aesthetic problem for our rural landscape, then, and all the rest of the land is 25% or more steep than that, you're basically living in a constrained house site with a lot of land that you need specialist mowing equipment on. So you don't create a usable rural residential lot. You create a house site in the middle of a rural residential area with a whole lot of potential constraints. And that's why I do recommend that the 2006 requirements and the new scheme requirements are things that we should take into significant consideration, and therefore the staff recommendation is one I support.
Anybody else wish to speak to the motion? To close, Brian, again?
I can't argue with the argument so far.
Like what you hear? Okay, those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Right, item 8 is development application for material change of use for an ancillary dwelling unit at Unit 133 Gateway Drive, Noosaville, Kerry, are we assessing a detached house or a unit?
Well, they've proposed it as a caretaker's residence, but I think it's just a house.
It's a house.
Yeah.
Because of its size and the number of bedrooms and
That's
bathrooms.
right. So, sorry, I think we do have Nadine online.
And the question, I think, goes to the confusion that may be around is that this is not a house sitting at the back of the industrial area, because it's the defined term for a detached house. It's actually...
That's right.
Yeah, so basically it's a separate household, not sufficiently with not sufficient nexus to the industrial use to determine the caretaker accommodation.
Yeah.
Joe, question?
Nadine, can you hear us okay? Hang on, I just need to turn you up a bit. Try again, can you hear us now?
I can hear you.
That's good.
We can
okay,
hear you.
we can hear you too. So you get lots of questions now.
Okay, Nadine or Kerry, on page 56, the report alludes to a minor change to existing approval on 27th of June 2018 to a caretaker's residence at Unit 4 of 40 Gateway Drive. Can you explain how a caretaker's residence at 4 of 40 Gateway Drive, which is on the other side of the road, relates to this unit complex on 33 Gateway Drive? I'm assuming that they were all part of one development approval at the time?
That's right. There was one approval for this extension of Gateway Drive for all these warehouse unit sort of developments down there. That's right.
Do all the components of the elements of development here still exist under the one ownership?
No, it's been titled. They're all separately titled, but they still remain under the one approval.
And okay, so there's still only the one approval, and that one approval and that amendment to that approval was for one caretaker's residence for the entire allotment.
Yeah, Nadine may wish to expand on that one. Nadine, I don't know much about that one.
The previous approval, the higher order approval, I should say, is relating to a change that was requested to permit a caretaker's residence. It wasn't specifically identified to caretake the entire 12 lots that was previously approved in the higher order approval. It relates more to the complex at 44 Gateway Drive rather than the entire subdivision overall.
Okay.
Question. The reason we're looking at this one for a refusal and not having enough nexus as a caretaker unit, what is the risk if we start approving units as caretaker units, but they're let out for other reasons, or they're basically used as a residence within an industrial area? What are the risks with just having general tenancies within an industrial area?
Well, there is a significant risk. This is our primary industrial area in Noosa. So residential uses and industrial uses don't go well together. They're incompatible uses. A residential use would start to inhibit and impact on the ability of genuine industrial uses operating. So this seems to be a little bit of a trend that's occurring in the area at the moment. We've had a number of applications in the area for ancillary dwelling units, and they're just not demonstrating any need for an ancillary dwelling unit. They seem to be proposing it as a means to provide more affordable housing. But the problem is where they have that potential to impact on the genuine operations of the industrial area. So
in terms of the trend, are there other sites or perhaps our business centres where the new scheme would encourage this sort of use?
Yes, that's exactly right. Our current scheme and our new scheme both encourage sort of shop top housing, where these sorts of styles of accommodation could be made available and built. So through all our business centres, you're able to do commercial on the ground floor and residential above for small dwelling units. We haven't had anyone take that up just as yet in our business centre, but certainly there's that opportunity.
One would suggest that the reason for a caretaker's residence in an industrial area is that the industrial area isn't as fully occupied as a commercial area would be outside of working hours. Is that the reason for caretaker's residence being proposed?
Yeah, that would be a genuine reason, and historically we've mostly seen the caretaker's residence proposed in association with self-storage units because it provides that security, sense of security for people storing their goods there on site.
One would think with a self-storage capacities that people would access that or have the capacity to access that after hours, and in the event that something doesn't function, that there is someone there to
That's right.
to facilitate that.
Exactly.
One of the reasons that appears to be a need for these caretakers' residences is security. Is there any other conditions that we can apply for other methodologies of security to be implemented before a caretaker's residence is approved, i.e. that all buildings are alarmed or a security system is in place, security lighting, CCTV cameras and the like?
That hasn't been our practice. I guess that's something we have left to the developer and the landowner to determine what's needed for their property and their business. And we'd have to write a particular code in the planning scheme to impose those sorts of requirements. I guess for me, I feel that that's probably best left to the business owner and the developer to determine what's most appropriate depending on their business and how they operate, whether they've got outdoor storage or it's internal or...
It seems by facilitating a caretaker's residence, though, we're accepting that that's an accepted means of providing security on site in certain circumstances.
Yeah, it is.
The other provision in the planning scheme, I noticed that in this lot with regard to 44 Gateway or 4 or 40 Gateway Drive, the caretaker's residence there, the proximity of this to that, is there a minimum distance that we recommend within the planning scheme for between caretakers' residences?
Nadine?
In the one development?
In the current planning scheme, there's no distance, separation distance specified. In the draft scheme, it indicates a minimum of 100 metres between caretakers' premises be necessary.
Thank you.
Just on the point of security, the report suggests that the applicant's arguments about improving security are not accepted because of lack of surveillance opportunity, the placement of windows, and am I reading this correct in saying that actually security could be compromised? This dwelling actually, because of its layout, poses a security risk.
Nadine, do you want to answer that?
It doesn't address the issues of security adequately.
Yes, my assessment has come to the conclusion that this could potentially compromise the security that they're seeking in the first place. The lighting of the caretaker's residence does not facilitate easy natural surveillance to the existing access points to the building, and the louver windows proposed in the rear window have no natural surveillance during day or night because of no nearby visual contact from the rear of the building. It's very isolated, and there's a wide treed drainage reserve between any potential natural surveillance points. So it has the potential to compromise any safety and security issues that they may already be having.
Sorry, from a fire safety perspective, I'm thinking of a unit complex that has had something similar here. If there were two separate occupants of the one building, one living on the mezzanine, one occupying the mezzanine floor, and a tenant on the ground floor, wouldn't there need to be fire separation between the two occupants?
That's correct. That's right. And that issue would be addressed by the building certifier if council was to approve the caretaker's residence, and it may require some redesign or
Okay, so that would go
relook
down
at
to building.
materials.
That would go down to how the
Yep.
building was implemented.
Yeah, and materials used. Yep.
Okay.
Joe, you put it? Yep.
Yeah, that was it.
Kieran, I just had a question. Look, I mean, the justification or the reasons they put forward is it's for security, but it will also only be used part-time when the tenant stores company vehicles and building materials on site, so from time to time. Is there any justification other than that of why there is a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom dwelling that they put forward?
And not that I understand. Nadine, was there anything further they put forward to us?
No, no further information provided.
Okay, thank you.
My only question, Kerry, is would this recommendation for refusal be consistent with decisions that we've made in the neighbouring precincts, like the Venture Drive precincts or other industrial zones?
Yeah. So we have had a recent one where there was 16 story dwelling units proposed at the end of Gateway Drive, which was refused. And we're currently in appeal with that matter. There has been a number of others where officers have approved them. And I have to say we've probably erred there. We should have looked at it a little bit closer in terms of the need for those caretakers' residents. So that will be held up in court to us when we do go forward with that other appeal, Gateway Drive. But it's really come to our attention given the amount of inquiries that we're getting around these caretakers' residents, and they're not genuine caretakers. It's caused us to have a look at them a lot closer than perhaps we were.
My understanding is during the discussions for the new planning scheme, one of the considerations in this precinct as an artisan zone is that someone may be implementing potting works and have artworks in the oven, for example, in a kiln or something like that, and need to be on site to manage those items being in a kiln or something like that overnight. Did that go through in the draft planning scheme as a consideration for how that precinct may be utilised?
Yes, so that is in the Venture Drive precinct in the new scheme to allow that sort of artisan approach, those sort of activities in this area.
So is that in essence a caretaker's residence that we were approving in this precinct?
No, there was never discussion about having sort of shop-top housing, if you like. If those sort of businesses can demonstrate a genuine need for caretakers' residence, then we would look at that. But each one has to be looked at on its own merit.
Thank you.
Given the lack of surveillance of, if this was approved, a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom residence upstairs in this premise, lack of windows, lack of surveillance, no one can really understand what's going on there. Was any concern amongst officers about what it could potentially be used for?
Well, the concern...
Taking the applicant at face value.
Well, the concern is that they haven't demonstrated that need as a caretaker's residence. So officers are concerned that that's not what's really being proposed here, that they are proposing a detached house and will let it out to other persons on the property.
My understanding with a residential type establishment anyway is from the building code there've been minimum requirements for light and ventilation and the like. I can only see a couple of windows here in the bedrooms and the living area. Do you have any idea whether that would pass the living requirements for under the building code?
We haven't done an assessment under the building code, so I don't know the answer to that, John.
Council's got a recommendation before us. Karen's got a question.
Yeah, just with regards to the accommodation size, they've proposed at 79.6 metres. We normally do the caretakers one at 65 as 1 bedroom. If they were prepared to go back to that size and address those needs we discussed today, would that change where we're at?
So under the current scheme, caretakers' residents can actually be up to 150 square metres.
Okay.
It's under the new scheme that they can go to 65.
Oh, okay.
Bringing the size down starts to address the issue, but it's got to be subordinate. So I would expect sort of a 1-bedroom, small unit. So I think there's a number of issues to address here. Nadine, have you had some discussions with the applicant around that at all?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear what your exact response was there regarding information that I've discussions I've had with the applicant, I went back to the applicant to ask them to demonstrate the need for the development, and they were very vague on that. They didn't really give me much to go on. There seems to be a perception that if they're the owner, they can automatically have one. So that really wasn't a very strong argument as to why there was a need for the caretaker's residence in this instance. Does that answer your question, Karen? Sorry?
I guess the issue is that it's not just around the size. They haven't demonstrated a need for the ancillary. You know, making it smaller would assist and bring it more into compliance, but it doesn't overcome the issue around, you know, is there a genuine need for the caretaker's residence here?
But there is an opportunity for a negotiated outcome in this case, that if they meet some of our conditions, that an auxiliary caretaker, proper caretaker residence may be satisfied.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue here is need. If they can demonstrate that it is genuinely needed, I think there's room to move in talking about the size of the unit.
But that would require a new application.
Require a new application or discussion during an appeal and a change to the application.
Yeah.
All right, councillors, we have a recommendation before us. Anyone care to move that?
No, yeah, I'll move it.
Move. Councillor Drusovic, seconded please. Seconded Councillor Stewart. Quicker off the mark. Councillor Drusovic.
Yeah, look, I support the staff recommendation here. This does appear to be nothing more than an attempt to establish a two-bedroom unit in the industrial area above an existing shop, but more like the old mixed-use type store that you used to find in the general street in residential areas in the past. I don't think that's what this area is intended for. There seems to be no a caretaker's residence for the purpose of added security and the like. I'm not sure this is providing added security for the entire complex or just the individual unit, and there's no mention of any other security measures being implemented to warrant the need for, or having not succeeded to warrant the need for a caretaker on site in this case. So I'll be supporting the staff recommendation. I believe the two-bedroom nature of the unit is more intended for a residential purpose than for a caretaker's residence.
I also support that. I do think that a two-bedroom, two-bathroom unit here is a little more than a caretaker's residence. The reasons put forward for security and not being there full time aren't justification enough, I don't think, to warrant the approval. I think if it was an opportunity to revisit where there is a genuine need and perhaps a smaller footprint in regard to maybe something with one bedroom and a bathroom, and one bathroom, maybe something that we can look at down the track. But I certainly think that a two-bedroom, two-bathroom sort of small unit style residence is not in accordance nor sort of fitting with the area and what was intended. So I'll be supporting the staff.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do send a clear message to the market that they've got this wrong. The concept that a 153 metre warehouse requires 2 or more people to secure occasional stock is not a valid planning ground for a secondary or a subordinate dwelling. I think it's clear that we do want to ensure there's provisions within the planning scheme, so then when there is a genuine need for a caretaker's residence, that we are able to approve it. And from my memory, the only recent one where there is a bona fide case that we supported was a significant larger chocolatory, to whatever that is, a chocolate making factory that also had some forward facing industrial tourism element to it, but it was a large processing plant looking at exporting product, where there was processes that could be going overnight on a 24-hour cycle that you'd want somewhere on site to be able, if there was problems with manufacturer, that you could intervene without doing it. So I think those larger processes, and I think the new scheme has sort of set some criteria around 1 per 2,000 square metres. They're the sort of things that you look at where there is a genuine need for someone to be there to ensure processes that would be going outside normal business hours can be addressed. So I do think it's important that we do set the line in the sand, which as we did for the larger development down the road, and just let it be known that caretakers, residents and ancillary and subordinate to uses that require them, not just to create an extra place for someone to live. I do think that if we send that clear message, then we will start to get significant interest in those business centres, both in the hinterland and on the coast, where this nature of use is proposed and encouraged. That we do want to see mixed use development, we do want to see people living near and above their businesses, but it's in an area where there is a higher level of amenity and where it's unlikely to affect the reverse amenity effect on adjacent industrial premises.
Yeah, look, common sense suggests that there's no two uses that are less compatible than residential and industrial. And I commend the staff and the councillors for taking a precautionary approach in their in assessing this application, which would approve a two bedroom, 2 bathroom residence in an industrial estate. As Councillor Stockwell mentioned, it raises all sorts of issues of reverse amenity, whereas if council has given an approval to a residence, does that imply some rights to have their peace and quiet protected at all times when they're in an area where industrial type activities with the noise and smells associated with that is quite common, and where you want that to take place? I think I applaud a precautionary approach to this particular application. The councillors wish to speak to the motion. Joe, do you wish to close?
I think it's all been said, but I'm glad that Brian and yourself brought up the issue of reverse amenity. Yes, whilst it's suggested in the report that it's only a temporary capacity on to be provided as a caretaker's lot, not to be lived in at all times, it does run the risk of being extended beyond that, and then of course, yes, noise in the industrial area becoming an issue for the person that has suddenly taken up residence in this situation. So I support the staff recommendation.
Put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous.
Thanks, Nadine.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks,
Nadine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nadine.
Thanks, Nadine.
So while you're there, can you fix up our revenue, Tom?
Michael's online.
Michael's online.
I saw
Can you hear us, Michael, okay?
Yes.
Good.
Welcome, Michael. We're at item 9, the financial report. We've got Michael online for any questions from councillors. The questions about the way the data is represented, the graphs, and
Michael, given that this is the first month into the end of April, into really into the major implications of COVID being felt, how does I see in the report you've got some indications of how this goes for council finances going forward for the rest of the financial year. Are there any major areas of concern that we may not have addressed?
No, look, in terms of the forecast position, I've probably indicated in the report there's a number of areas where revenue will be degraded. So particularly, as you're all aware, we've got closed facilities where significant revenues come in particular the obviously the NAC, holiday parks and so on. So look, we're looking at approximately a $2.5 million impact from COVID on our revenue through to the end of the financial year, which will obviously that forecast revenue will probably, instead of getting a roughly the 100 million, we'll probably looking at around the 97.5 million. But obviously with variable cost savings, so we're looking at approximately $1 million or so of variable cost savings to offset that revenue shortfall. But also in terms of the organisation's response to belt tightening a little bit to obviously manage some uncertainty and risk, given it's a 1 in 100 year event. there's at least $500,000 in other savings that we've been able to quarantine to minimise that deficit position at year end. So we're looking at approximately between a $500,000 and $1 million operating deficit at 30 June. So look, in terms of our overall cash flows, that's manageable. Our sustainability is not compromised. However, obviously going forward, that's, that'll be discussed in the budget workshops in terms of what that means to future budgets and our 10-year financial plan.
I'm suggesting those worst case scenarios, depending on based on the current state's approach to reopening of facilities.
Well, no, they're based on, if you look at the current state response or the reopening provisions, the reality is if the forecast that we've put together, assuming closed facilities, if facilities opened under the current arrangements, it'd be a worse position given that our variable cost would be higher than any revenues that would come in.
Okay, I've got you.
So Michael, just to explain that, so for example, if we open the pool now for 10 people to go in there, it would actually cost more than having it closed.
Correct.
Sorry, so you're looking at the best operating procedure based on the current scenario that the state are applying to us.
Yeah, that's correct. And the reality is that they were only announced a week or so ago. So, we've been trying to react to this crisis, a month ago. So it's a little bit difficult to try and rework numbers on a daily basis. So we've adopted, the provisions we thought would be in place, and that was closure through to the end of June. But obviously, things are changing weekly at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, it's Claire here. I have a similar question. I think I asked you last week about, everyone's so keen to get back, and at what point with a staggered reopen does the opening of these facilities become economically viable? And so I guess that was my question, is how are we and you're in the process of looking at that. Is that very much dependent upon those health directives from state?
Yeah, look, it is. I think currently under those provisions, 10 people at a time isn't viable.
Yeah.
I think even 20, possibly not. I think we're looking more at, particularly for our facilities, obviously the J, the Leisure Centre and the Aquatic Centre. We're currently analysing what that means for the holiday parks. There could be some opportunity there. However, we're sort of doing some break-even analysis at the moment to see, what are the minimum numbers or occupancy levels there to ensure that, we don't actually lose money if we reopen. And there's at least a break-even point where we can attempt to get these facilities open without compromising ratepayers' equity and the bottom line.
So what we're going through is the same as what large restaurants are going through at the moment. It makes sense to reopen for 10 people, probably not, but if you've got a 10-seater restaurant, it probably does. So the issue for us is the scale of what we've got. I'm
desperate to take my caravan somewhere.
So my question is probably to the CEO. These decisions are yours until June 30?
No. We're making these operationally within. So my delegation is finished. That delegation lasted up until the start of this council. So, but we are dealing with this operationally in the sense that, for example, the pool, Ash will be looking at that and going, well, what's the best time that you can balance community need, and operational need, and financial need? How do we create a safe workplace for our staff as well? So that's the other consideration. So they're just working through each of those through Kerry Conteen's team to have a look at when would it make sense to do that.
But having said,
my question was going to the point that it won't necessarily just be because we're a government, not a profit-making business, it won't just be on whether we'll make it financially viable, it's about whether we think that the benefits to the community outweigh the short-term loss from operating.
And I've got to look at staff safety and all those sort of things. Yeah. We take weigh all that into account.
Yep.
But also under delegation, my understanding is some of those decisions made did take us up to the end of the financial years. So
yeah, not in relation to opening and closing facilities, but certainly in relation to leases and things like that. Yes.
Okay.
Permit waivers, that sort of thing. Yep.
Thank you.
Michael, in regards to cost savings, I've just got a few questions. I'm assuming that we define our buses as essential services. Have we reduced the number of buses or frequency of buses during this COVID-19 period?
So Councillors doesn't run the bus service. That's
Okay.
run by TransLink. The only buses that we pay for are the ones at Easter and Christmas. So we actually hire those, if you like, or pay TransLink for that service. But otherwise, we don't have any bus services that we pay for.
So the only diminishment of bus services that council responsibility was the one over Easter, where we did not undertake the free bus service.
Say the ratepayers' money out of the transport, the sustainable transport levy.
Sure. Solar power. We've got a number of council buildings and commercial buildings with unused solar power. Is there an opportunity, A, to sell this power back to the grid, or have we got solar battery storage to collect the energy that's not being used?
Look, there's no battery storage in place. I think that technology hasn't yet been explored by council. Only sort of the last couple of years has been panels. But in terms of selling back to the grid, under our pricing arrangements, any unused solar, that happens. So that obviously is part of sort of like solar panels at home. If any excess solar that goes back into the grid actually becomes a saving to council. So I'm hoping that's happening at the moment.
Okay. Has council encouraged or incentivised businesses and households to purchase batteries, solar batteries?
No.
Oh, look, that's probably not my area, so I'd have to take that on notice.
Yeah, I don't believe so,
No.
Amelia. And Annie, if you just have a chat to Annie Nolan about that, she'll be able to answer that. I'm pretty sure that's not the case at the moment.
No, but my understanding is Zen, the community organisation, has been offering advice and facilitating advice to the community and businesses for those opportunities.
And we provided funding to that organisation.
Kim's got a comment on that. There's a service that the council offers as well.
Yeah, that's right. We haven't provided any incentives for that, but we do have a...
At this stage.
Sorry. Yeah, so we haven't provided any incentives, and Councillor Druzic's right, Zen Inc. has been promoting that opportunity for our residents, but we also have through our website, we have a program that provides free advice and links to providers for people who want to do solar or battery. So yeah, we subsidise that free advice, but it's a free service to all our residents and businesses via our website. And there's been some good take-up of that as well.
And local suppliers being preferred suppliers.
Local suppliers being,
Thank you.
Not one to curtail, lovely conversation. We're dealing with the financial report. I think questions and commentary should be related to the financial report.
Well, I guess savings related to solar.
That was fine.
I think that was a good one.
Advice to businesses is well outside.
With no tourists, Michael, what's the potential impact on asset management and the associated maintenance programs? Will there be a cost saving there, and has that been factored into our financial report?
Well, there's obviously two components. There's the operating budget and then there's the capital budget. The capital budget is forecast to be spent. I think we're forecasting pretty much that $30 or $29 million to be spent up to 30 June with a minor, I think $2 or $3 million carryover of funds for unfinished projects. So in terms of asset management, a decision was made a few days ago to resurface Hastings Street, Lord Batten. So there's a good example. There's a lot of roadworks going on at the moment. Councils are probably aware of in terms of Hilton Terrace and so on. So that there's no sort of there hasn't been any degradation of delivering capital works in terms of just general ongoing operating maintenance of facilities and so on. That's also occurring. So where facilities are being currently closed, managers are taking that opportunity to, undertake any preventative or reactive maintenance that was formed part of their budgets.
Probably just to add to that, feedback I'm getting from the outdoor staff is that they're able to get through some of the capital works programs a bit quicker at the moment. The traffic controls a bit easier.
That was the question I was going to. That was the question I was going to follow on with regard to
speed is actually picked up. They're ahead of some of the programs. We're examples down here on Hilton Terrace. So they're a couple of weeks ahead there than they thought they might have been.
Weather would have been a bearing in that as well.
Sure,
hasn't had the weather implications at the moment either.
Claire?
Yeah. Michael, total cash on hand at the end of April 2020, 67.4 million. Yep.
Sorry, yep.
So, yeah, how liquid is that?
Very liquid. Most of that is funded, currently invested with Queensland Treasury in their cash fund, so it's effectively having it on call.
Great.
So look, we that is liquid cash on hand.
Great. And in regard to Unity Water Distributions, it's about, we get about 300,000 or a bit more a year on that. Is that correct?
A couple of million.
A couple of million, is it?
Michael, just to explain how much we get off Unity Water and how that's made up, if you don't mind, on an annual basis. Just ballpark.
Yeah, so look, we receive about 5.6 million a year from Unity Water through a combination of dividends, tax payments, and interest on the loan they have with us. And that's fixed, so regardless of any potentially their operating or financial performance, those returns are guaranteed to ourselves and also the other shareholders, Unity, Moreton Bay and Sunshine Coast.
Is that paid annually, like once a year? And if so, when is that paid?
It's paid, it's a combination of payments. The tax equivalent's paid monthly.
Yep.
The dividend's paid twice a year, an interim dividend and a final dividend. And the interest payments actually are also paid, I think, quarterly.
Great, thank you. And the 1.4 million we received in interest, is that from the money that obviously that we've got in Queensland Treasury and any other banks?
So currently it's pretty much all in Queensland Treasury, with some still retained for working capital in the Commonwealth Bank.
Cool, thanks, Michael.
So if you have a look on the bottom of page 74,
That's
it's a very busy graph, but what that's designed to do is show you where we've got money invested at any one time. So if you look back at May 19, at the beginning of that graph, you can see we had some with the Bendigo term deposit, some with the National Bank term deposit, Suncorp, whatever. The big blue one is Queensland Treasury Corporation, and that's where, as interest rates are going down, they've got the best rates, so we've got more money into that. And then the one at the top is like our day-to-day Commonwealth Bank working capital.
Certainly in the past, there've been much more colourful areas of graph in that. Michael, just relating to the Mayor's first question with regard to liquidity, all of that cash is not free cash. Elements of it would be constrained, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's correct. There are constrained components, which is obviously reflects unspent levies and so on. Developer contributions received currently constrained. So yeah, look, I can't give you that figure offhand, but yes, it does include restricted components.
Just wanted to clarify that it wasn't all free cash; that there were restrictions to.
Government grants.
Very good. I just saw her eyes lighting up.
Michael,
I think the thing to note too is, look, at the end of we're still forecasting a balance of around the 44 million at year end, because we're spending around $13 million or $26 million between now and then on our materials, employee costs and capital
works to
so
collect.
that will be spent over the next 2 months.
Michael,
Component of that.
2 more questions from me in regards to operating grants and subsidies. Business rent relief for property owned and managed by council. After our last conversation, have we given any more thought to establishing a criteria?
Yes, so look,
for providing rent relief,
Yeah, we will be, obviously, the current arrangements are in place until 30 June.
Yep.
As part of the development of next year's budget, we are looking at applying the federal government code of conduct provisions in terms of commercial rents, and some of those assumptions will be brought to councillors as part of the budget workshops for discussion.
Fantastic. And also something I raised in our last conversation in regards to materials and services, is there an opportunity, or can I request that in future financial reports we actually separate consultants and legal fees and not included under one head, given that development assessment legal appeal costs were almost $1 million. So it'd be just great to have that in black and white when reading the report.
Yeah, sure. We'll take that on board, and we'll rework the report to highlight those two particular cost lines.
Yeah.
Sure. Just on that, Mike, you could probably even do it in the attachment 1 under expenses, just break it out.
That would be fantastic.
The line item there.
Yeah. In regards to legal costs, it's $159,000 above the year to date, which equals $994,000 of the $1 million budget spent. My question, this is just again a recommendation if we're looking at cost savings. Have we actually investigated in hiring an in-house planning and environment legal expert? And my other question is, who does council give the bulk of this legal work to?
I can probably answer both of those.
Yep.
To answer your first question is yes, we have looked at that a couple of times over the years about whether or not it makes sense to have an in-house counsel at council if you're part of the fund. And it's still something I'm thinking about. I think it's worth looking at. The current work at the moment, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of the work goes to Wakefield Sites, council's town planning lawyer. At some stage, Wake will retire. He's of an age where that's probably going to occur, and I think that will be the trigger for us to look at whether or not we have an in-house lawyer to help manage that process.
How long have we engaged Wakefield Sites in council?
35. He's done the majority of council's planning work for, I'm guessing, 30 years.
Wow. Okay.
I think they came up. I think they came up in our conversation.
We've obviously used other firms as well, yeah, I think that is the stage. I've had this discussion within the exec team about what point would we look at having an in-house lawyer.
I'm sure we can entice an expert to come to Noosa.
The trick for that, because this is how I started in local government in that role. The trick is that if you're an in-house lawyer, you can't be an expert in everything of all the legal issues that council will have. And you've really got two choices when you start to look at that. You have an in-house lawyer who looks at managing the process or taking that process on as a corporate counsel, for want of a better phrase, or you want someone who's a specialist who does it. And they're two slightly different roles. So I think that's where, when we get to that point, we've got to make that choice.
Regardless of, I would assume an element of the cost of legal cost would be hiring of the specialist and the experts that in those fields with regard to traffic and that are part of the process.
That's
so
right. So
it's not all just the lawyer.
Right.
It's all of the specialists that go with each of those.
Yeah. The barrister's a big cost if it goes with the
And regardless if we had an in-house lawyer, that we'd still need to hire a barrister.
You still have barristers, you don't have town planning experts.
But it would be substantially cheaper or a better arrangement than what we've got at the moment. Yeah.
So just to add to the conversation, Wakefield Sykes in the late 80s joined as an in-house solicitor and for quite considerable time provided the services currently does now as a consultant. So it was, and it was a much, the court cases and the development was significantly higher at that particular time in terms of what was being proposed, including 7,000 people resorts and things like that. So it is he individually has experienced a lot from both sides.
I'll move.
I've got another question.
More questions? Kate's got some questions.
Thank you. Michael, thank you for your report. I have a question around rates, of course, because that will be on everybody's lips out in community who are struggling at this time with job losses and the impacts of the COVID. I notice in the report you are undertaking a cash flow analysis is currently occurring to make sure that our rate arrears ratio remains sustainable. Are we looking at any processes to have in place if we have a large percentage of community that comes back at some point and says it's impossible for them to pay their rates? How are we going to address that?
Yeah, there's it's obviously a concern for me and the team, and obviously the community. There are already provisions within our rating policies to have arrangements to pay. So we do consider capacity for ratepayers who can't pay their rates. So we do enter or allow them to enter into payment arrangements. But obviously, as part of the budget process moving forward, council needs to adopt a revenue policy and a revenue statement, and we'll be discussing different options there with council and councillors to potentially provide a bit more relief to ratepayers through potentially looking at extending discount periods and so on. So those discussions are yet to happen, but we're looking at those options and how obviously that affects council's cash flows whilst trying to accommodate the challenges that's facing the community at the moment.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Right.
So I've got a range of questions around asset sustainability ratio. I'll take them one by one. The firstly is just about the indicator and the target. So when I look at the graph on bottom of page 75, I see in April that the result is about 20% below the budget trend line. Yet when I look up on the pages above, the ratio is on track. Is that because the line of I'm trying to look at the table now, the table's on page 69, and it says asset sustainability ratio on track. Is that because we're comparing it against the local government target of 90% rather than the budget? Or is it just that a 20% variation is considered reasonable at this point in time?
I think it's on target in terms of we'll achieve that ratio at 30 June. There's, as I mentioned, there is a considerable amount of spend to happen in the next 2 months. The infrastructure team are confident that if the rain goes away that we've had this morning, last night and the last couple of days, then they can we can bring in our renewals spend upwards of effectively our depreciation of around that $18 million. So that will then obviously will hit that benchmark target of 90%, which is that's the indicator that the Department of Local Government and QDC are looking for councils to hit.
Sure. So when we talk about renewals, there's been actually a bit of debate in the community, as one might expect, in terms of bringing forward resealing of Hastings Street and Claude Batten Drive. So renewals are about investing in maintaining your assets, so it would include reseals. What else does renewals tend to cover on a consistent basis?
Well, renewals is effectively replacing assets that are there at the moment. So it could, you're talking roofs on buildings, you could be talking electrical equipment in buildings. We've just done a lot of renewals at our aquatic facility, so we retiled the pool. So it covers all of those different elements where you're replacing an asset you already have, and that effectively what you're doing is saying, well, when that reaches the end of its life, it needs to be replaced because it still needs to be used in terms of council's operations to deliver services for the community.
Mm-hmm. So last question, if like some other councils close to us don't meet that asset sustainability ratio and choose to invest in a whole lot of new projects like new bikeways, etc., rather than maintaining their existing access, what's the long-term problems that councils encounter if they don't separate their renewal budget and keep to that target of 90%?
Obviously the 90% is a benchmark. How, in terms of the life cycle of assets, some councils may not need to spend 90% because they have newer assets and they're not due for replacement. Other councils are at maybe the back end of the life cycle and they have to spend over 90%, but on average 90% is sort of the benchmark of your depreciation, so renewing your assets. Look, if you start spending your cash on new assets and then you realise you don't have enough to keep renewing your assets, then that's why probably 42 councils are not sustainable at the moment in Queensland, because they're not looking after what they've got, and that's a challenge for all local government. That needs to be managed because there are needs. There is community expectations for new things and new services, but it's the responsibility to make sure that that's the council balances that challenge and continues to replace assets at a level that's sustainable, and that any new assets or upgrades, your whole of life cost is considered, because that has a flow-on impact on your operating budget.
Probably just add to what Michael said, you know, at its heart, asset management is about looking after what you've got before you build something new. Because if you keep building stuff that's new and not looking after what you've got, you end up with an infrastructure cliff a few years down the track. Might come for 10 or 20 years, but eventually, by building new assets, they've got to be maintained as well. So you're adding to your asset base, and you're getting a backlog every year of what needs to be maintained. So it's a long-term game, this one, and it's easy sometimes to make these decisions in 1 or 2 years because you don't see the impact. The impact comes for the future generations, and often has that 5 or 10 year lag.
But the impact on an asset is also the level of use that that asset gets, and the wear and tear on that asset as a result of that use.
Michael, I've got a question on page 76 about an investment return. There's a target of investment return of 0.25% above current Bloomberg Commonwealth 10-year bond rate. The council's getting 1.38% return, which is 5 times the amount. 2 questions. Who sets that target? Is that a council set target, or is it an industry target? And what's council doing to get 5 times that amount?
Yeah, look, we set the target, but it's obviously based on industry benchmarks. I think the reason that we're getting a good return, and obviously that the bond rate is factoring in a lot of future things around the fact that the world economy is potentially going south at a fast rate of knots due to COVID. But look, Queensland Treasury Corporation are a very strong financial institution. They're capital guarantee, they're backed by the state government. They're very shrewd operators, and the reason we're getting that 1.38% is a lot of our cash is with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Being backed by the state government's a bit of a worry as a term, Michael, considering the financial state that the state finds itself in.
Well, look, if the state government goes under, then we're all in trouble.
Yeah, show me that. No one just report that we're investing in Virgin.
And Michael, it's a question you might have to take on notice, but under cemetery fees, I noticed in the monthly reports they've been consistently above budget. So is that a question of conservative budgeting, or are we losing more people than estimated? What's going on there?
Well, we're obviously losing more people than we budgeted for. But look, I suppose it's challenging. You know, the cemetery team, they can put a forecast in on how many burials they'll think they'll have each year. But probably the last 2 or 3 years, burials have been under budget. So it's actually a bit of a flip on previous years. It's a challenging one because it's hard to, without doing some really detailed sort of analysis on health rates and so on in the Shire, it's a bit of a guesstimate in terms of their budget and how many burials they have. But a lot of their variable cost is linked to their revenue. So whilst their in previous years their burial revenue was down, so were their costs. So they balance that overall position.
The question with regard to burials would also be with regards to people's preference into how they go, if it's cremation burials, or so you know, it's people's making a choice in one way, shape or form over another.
Yeah, just morbid curiosity. Thank you.
Morbid curiosity.
Interesting.
It's not one you put an online booking in.
Right. Right, councillors, any further questions for Michael? Someone care to put the recommendation? Move the recommendation. Amelia has moved it. We have a seconder, please.
Lawrenson.
It's seconded Councillor Finzel. You wish to speak to it, Amelia?
No.
No. Any other councillors wish to?
No, I'd just like to acknowledge the work the staff put in with regard to the current situation with, at all times, let alone with the current situation with COVID-19 and the additional work that is being put in. So I'd like to thank you and your team in particular, Michael, for all the added burden that you have at the moment in these challenging times. And I guess we look forward is probably the wrong word to the budget process ahead and how we manage this going forward in the next 12 months.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to Joe's comments, there's no greater indicator of a local government's health than the financial reporting. It's very open, it's very transparent, it's very extensive, and thank you and your staff for your willingness to take on board new suggestions about how that can be even more detailed. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Frank.
Right, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. That's the last item. Thank you, councillors, for your patience and your discipline. Let's declare the meeting closed.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.